Episode 1. A Fresh Start. The last season finished with Candace confronting Joe in the bookstore, and she tells him she's going to bring him down and punish him for all of the bad things he's done. This freaks Joe out, so that night, he decides to up and leave town, and he moves all the way across the country to Los Angeles, California to start fresh. He even adopts a new name, Bettelheim, so Candace won't be able to find him. Joe moves into an apartment complex that is managed by a beautiful girl named Delilah who has a younger sister, Ellie, who seems to get along with Joe right away. A few weeks later, Joe applies for a job at a local convenience store named Anavrin, and while in there, a woman catches his eye just like Beck did in the last season. He approaches her and learns that her name is Love and her family actually owns the store he's working at. Love tells him she is a widow and her husband died not too long ago from a sickness they couldn't control. Some other characters that we meet this episode are Love's brother, 40, and Joe's new boss and Love's father, Calvin. When Joe gets home from work later that day, Ellie tells him that a man named Jasper came looking for him while he was out, and then Joe goes into a storage unit where he has the real Bettelheim locked inside his infamous glass cage. Joe stole his identity and life. Episode 2. Just the tip. This episode begins with Joe first arriving in Los Angeles after moving from New York, and we then learn that Joe was stalking Love before he even applied for the job with Anavrin. She is the reason he wanted a job there in the first place. It is also shown that Joe met up with the real Bettelheim looking for a fake ID, and he just decided to kidnap him and take his identity. In present day, Joe and Love go on their first date and even share their first kiss, but Joe still sees visions of Beck tormenting his guilt. Joe goes to meet with this Jasper fella, and Jasper says since Will dipped out and didn't pay his debt, it is now Joe's responsibility to pay him now. Joe isn't a fan of this, but then Jasper cuts one of Joe's fingers off and tells him he can have the finger back when he receives the 50 grand he is owed. Joe, not knowing what to do, brings Jasper to the storage unit and shows his the real Will locked up. Jasper says it doesn't change anything, but then Joe kills Jasper right in front of William. Joe gets his finger back and has a doctor sew it back on. A cool montage then shows Joe dicing up Jasper's body while Love is dicing up fish at her house. Joe then goes to Love's house and tells her he doesn't know if he is ready for a relationship or not because of his last one. But Love tells him they like each other and should give it a shot and not wait. He ponders it and then goes home where he talks to Delilah, who was assaulted when she was young by a famous comedian named Henderson, and he's never been brought to justice. Episode 3. What are friends for? Joe and Love decide to become friends for now, but Joe is definitely having intimate thoughts about her, but he doesn't want it to end tragically like his last relationship. Meanwhile, Joe starts communicating more with Will, and they actually start becoming friends in some Stockholm Syndrome type of way. Will tells Joe that he should just give it a shot with Love and live in the moment. Joe agrees, and then he tries getting close with Love's brother, 40, in hopes of getting in good with the family before he starts dating Love. 40 is your typical, I have rich parents, untouchable loser, and Joe is well aware of this. But he says a relationship with Love won't work without her family's blessing. They attend a comedy show together where Henderson is performing, and Joe realizes he is the guy that Delilah was talking about. Joe has started to care for both Delilah and Ellie, so it's natural he wants to get revenge. He doesn't act yet and decides to think what he's going to do to him. When Joe gets home a few days later, he learns that Henderson gave Ellie an edible at a party, and Joe is mad about this because Ellie is underage and shouldn't even be around Henderson partying. This just makes Joe want to get him back even more. That weekend, Joe and 40 sneak into one of Henderson's house parties, and 40 gets blackout wasted while Joe tries stealing Henderson's laptop to get dirt on him. Joe then takes 40 home because he is incoherent and then calls Love to his apartment. Love tells Joe that 40 is self-conscious and really cares what people say about him. Love and Joe then hook up. The following day, Joe scours through Henderson's laptop, but finds no dirt on him, and he starts to wonder if Henderson is innocent. 40 then talks with him and tells Joe that Henderson has a creepy sex dungeon below his house. Episode 4. The Good, the Bad, the Hendy. Joe installs spyware on Ellie's phone without her knowing because he wants to see what she and Henderson talk about. Ellie thinks her and Henderson are in a consensual relationship, but since she is underage, Joe will not let it go on any further, and he wants to make sure Henderson gets arrested. Joe breaks into Henderson's house when he has gone at a comedy show one night with the help of the real Will that coached Joe on how to bypass the security system. When Joe gets inside, he finds the sex dungeon 40 had told him about and finds photos of women, even including Delilah in one. Joe steals the pictures and leaves them on Delilah's doorstep for her to hopefully turn him into the police. It would look bad if Joe turned them in. Delilah discovers the photos and she gives them to her current boyfriend, who is a police officer, and he tells her they can't use them because there's no evidence that they are Henderson's. Delilah is heartbroken to hear this. Later that day, Joe looks at Ellie's messages and reads that she is on the way over to Henderson's house right now, and Joe heads over there immediately as well. Joe sees Henderson put something in Ellie's drink, so he breaks in and grabs Henderson and drags him down to the dungeon before he could drug Ellie. Down there, Henderson breaks free, but Joe is able to grab him and throws him down the stairs to his death. Joe then hurries to clear the crime scene before Ellie can realize he is downstairs and Henderson is dead. Joe then decides to let Will out of the cage the next day and back into society when he believes Will won't turn him in. The episode closes with Joe seeing Love and 40 hanging out with Candace, who is using a fake name, Amy. She found Joe. Episode 5. Have a good Wellkend, Joe. Joe goes with Love to meet her parents at a weekend retreat. News is also released to the public that Henderson was found dead, and they think he did it to himself. Back at their apartment complex, Ellie finds the pictures of Delilah, and she explains that Henderson took them, but Ellie doesn't want to believe it, and she says he's a nice guy. She's beyond upset that he's dead. Back at the retreat, Love introduces Joe to her parents, and then 40 introduces Candace to their parents, as well as he brought her as a date. Joe knows she has other intentions, though. A little later, Joe pulls Candace aside, and she found him because he ended up online through a video of one of Henderson's parties. Candace tells Joe she is going to expose him for everything, and that is her only goal here. Candace knows Joe killed Beck and her music producer back in the day. A flashback shows Joe burying Candace as he thought she was dead, but she obviously wasn't. She was able to dig her way out. Back in present day, 40 relapses and Joe and Love have to take care of him while Candace doesn't even bother to check on him. Back in LA, Ellie convinces Delilah to throw the pictures away and never talk about them again since Henderson is dead anyway, and they can't do anything more with them. Ellie doesn't want Henderson exposed as a terrible person. That Monday, 40 is put back in rehab, and he reads Beck's book while inside. Also, the police found more evidence about Henderson's death, and they are now ruling it a homicide. Candace assumes Joe killed him. Episode 6. Farewell, my bunny. Everyone attends Henderson's memorial, and we see the chess match being played with Candace and Joe, and he is trying to read her next move, and he knows his time is dwindling down. Also, Joe hopes being at the funeral doesn't set off red flags, and he is kind of freaking out because that night when he got back to his apartment, Delilah's cop boyfriend was there and spoke to him saying he was suspicious of him, but that was all he said. The following day, Joe starts following Candace all around town, but then he sees a guy tailing him as well, so he decides to go home. Joe goes to hang out with Delilah, and Ellie wants back. That night, Joe goes out and he notices the guy is still following him, and he goes into Anaverin where Love tells him that the man is their family's private detective who Love hired to look into Candace, and since Joe was following Candace, the detective was following as well. Joe is a little concerned what Candace will tell this detective when she realizes that she is being followed meticulously. The following day when Joe is working, Candace breaks into Joe's apartment to look for any evidence he might have, and she is confronted by Love. Candace tells Love everything about Joe's past and how he's dangerous, and Love asks for proof of these accusations. Candace says she will get it. Later that night, Love confronts Joe about what Candace said, and Joe does admit to the name change. But he didn't murder anyone and says Candace is just a psycho ex that is mad he broke up with her. Love believes him, but says they should stay friends for now until this drama is over. Joe then hooks up with Delilah to get his mind off of Love, but this only makes him realize he is in love with Love. Episode 7. Existential Crisis. Joe wants to get back with Love, but he learns she has already moved on to a new man, and this makes Joe super jealous. 40 tells Joe that the guy was best friends with her husband, and he says how he is a total tool, and 40 likes Joe with Love a lot more. Joe starts following this dude around until he runs into an old friend, Gabe, who brings up bad memories from Joe's childhood and causes him to break down crying. He had a very abusive father that hit both he and his mother a lot. When Joe gets to his apartment complex later, he runs into Delilah, who says she is going to run a story on all of Henderson's illegal activities because he deserves to be outed, but she knows Ellie isn't going to like it. Joe tells Delilah he is proud of her and should do it, and they hook up again in public, but are arrested for indecent exposure. Joe calls 40 to come bail him out, and then the cop that used to have a thing with Delilah sees them together, and this pisses him off even more because he already doesn't like Joe. Joe and Delilah do agree they should stop hooking up and they are better as close friends. A few days later, 40 and Milo get into argument about love and Joe has to break it up. At her apartment, her cop boyfriend tells Delilah that there is something off about Joe and she shouldn't talk to him anymore. But she says he is just being jealous and there's nothing between her and Joe. He does convince her to look into him, and she breaks into his apartment and finds a set of keys, and when she uses one of them on his storage unit, the glass cage is empty. Joe then walks in and he has no choice but to put her in the cage so she can't tell anyone what he has there. Joe says he's not going to kill her, but he needs to find a way to get out of this mess. Episode 8. Fear and Loathing in Beverly Hills. Joe tells Delilah he is setting a timer for 16 hours, and when it goes off, he will let her free. Meanwhile, Love goes out with a few of her friends, and she tells them that she wants to be with Joe, and the short time with Milo made her realize this. They tell her to go get her man right away and make it right. Over to 40, who goes to Joe, and he tells them that a director wants to use his script for a TV show, and he based the script off of Beck's book. 40 wants Joe's help with finishing the screenplay since he personally knew Beck. Out of nowhere, they are kidnapped by two dudes. They are locked inside a hotel room together, and Joe learns that 40 set this all up so they could be put in the same room and not leave until the screenplay was finished. Joe agrees to do so, and after they are done, they go to a bar where 40 doses Joe's drink with LSD. Joe starts hallucinating a ton, and then he all of a sudden wakes up in a bathroom covered in blood. This was all a part of 40's plan as well, and 40 dosed him with LSD so Joe would speak all of his truths. 40 tells Joe he knows that he really killed Beck and how Dr. Nikki went down for the crimes Joe committed. 40 then admits he did the same thing and killed his ex-girlfriend and her boyfriend after she left him. Joe then realizes he only has an hour left on his timer, and when he gets to his storage unit, he finds Delilah dead inside the cage with blood everywhere. Did he do this while tripping the night prior? Episode 9. P.I. Joe. Joe is freaking out and he can't believe he would actually kill Delilah because he truly did care for her and didn't want to hurt her. He starts to wonder if Candace may have done this and tried to pin it on him so there would be evidence he's a murderer. Joe goes to 40 and asks him to event him on the whole night and what all they did. 40 does say that Joe wanted to make a pit stop at his storage unit after they left the bar, and he was there for about 30 minutes while 40 waited in the car. When Joe gets to his apartment complex, he sees Ellie there, and she is freaking out because she can't find her sister anywhere. Love is also there, and she tells Joe she wants to be with him, and she's finally realized this. Joe tells Ellie he is going to find out what happened to her sister no matter what. Elsewhere, Candace goes to talk with 40, and she tells 40 everything about Joe's past, and 40 tells her that he already knows all of this stuff, and he tells her to leave before she ruins everything. Candace does some investigating on her own, and she learns of Joe's storage unit, and when she gets there, she sees Joe inside cleaning up, and Candace uses this opportunity to lock him in the glass cage. Candace then calls Love to come see the terrible human being that Joe is. Love arrives, and Joe confesses to everything, and he knows he's cooked at this point. Love breaks down and storms outside where Candace follows her, and Love stabs Candace in the neck. Candace dies, and then Love goes back inside to tell Joe she took care of their problem. Joe cannot believe what just happened, and he realizes Love might just be as crazy as himself. Episode 10. Love Actually. Season Finale. The finale kicks off with Love telling the viewers about her background, and she was the one that killed 40 ex-girlfriend and her love because she saw how hurt 40 really was after the breakup. 40 thought he had done it because he was high on drugs and doesn't remember what actually happened. Love then met Joe, and she fell in love with him from the first time they met, and when she started digging more into his background, she learned who he really was, and she thought they were a match made in heaven. That's why every time they grew apart, she did her best to make sure they made up and stayed together. She tells this all to Joe, and he doesn't really know how to react because he is so shocked. Love was the one that killed Delilah because Delilah found out that Love was pregnant with Joe's baby, and Love wanted the child's father to be in his life and not in prison. So Love took care of that problem as well. Joe is stunned he's going to be a father. Joe realizes that even if he doesn't want to, he needs to stay with Love now because she knows everything about him and could easily bring him down if she wanted to, and he doesn't want to get on her bad side. Joe also won't abandon a child of his as he knew what he went through during his childhood, and he doesn't want that for his own children. About a week later, 40 asks to meet with the couple, and when there, 40 says he knows the truth about everything and how he's innocent, and he lunges at Joe to kill him. but the cop from earlier shows up and shoots 40 dead before he could get to Joe. The show then flash forwards a few months later, and Joe and Love are now living together in a new house, and Joe takes a liking to the beautiful lady living next door. Probably his next victim for the next season. And that is it for season 2 of You. We'll be doing the other seasons next, so I hope you can check those out when they are uploaded. Will be a direct link on the screen if it is up yet. Thanks for watching.